Wore a watch from my ex, causing tension on my anniversary with my girlfriend, and now I'm questioning my right to keep it. When I was 25, my ex-girlfriend surprised me with an incredible watch for my birthday. To paint the full picture, her job paid her $92,000 a year, plus a living allowance, and they covered most of her big expenses: her rent, hotels, food, even her car and phone. Basically, she saved a ton and always had money to spare. The watch wasn't a Rolex or anything, but it easily cost a couple $1,000s. It's by far the nicest watch I own. My other options are a battered Timex from college and an Apple Watch. Fast forward a year and a half later, our relationship ended. Her company moved to a different city, and though she'd fly back on weekends, that distance just wore us out. The breakup was amicable, just a result of life getting in the way. I remember she did ask for the watch back, but I stood my ground and told her it was a gift, and I wanted to keep it. That's a whole other story, but that's how things ended up. Now, I've been dating my current girlfriend for just over a year. She's 26, and she has a real problem with that watch. I rarely wear it, just on special occasions. Every so often, she suggests I should sell it and use the money for something else, but it's my only proper watch and, honestly, I couldn't afford anything like it now. Last weekend, we celebrated our first anniversary. We both dressed up for a night out at a fancy restaurant, and I thought it was the perfect occasion to wear my watch. She didn't notice until we were seated, but as soon as she saw it, her mood shifted. She asked me why I wore it and told me it was disrespectful to show up to our anniversary wearing something my ex gave me. From my perspective, the watch has no sentimental value, none at all. I don't wear it and think of my ex. It's just a beautiful watch, one I'd never be able to buy for myself. But I didn't want to ruin the night, so I quietly slipped the watch off my wrist and into my pocket. Even then, the damage was done. She was curt and withdrawn for the rest of the evening, barely speaking to me through dinner. On the drive home, she stayed silent and went straight to bed when we got in. The next day, I gently asked her to help me understand why the watch upset her so much, especially since it means nothing to me emotionally. She just dismissed me, saying she didn't want to talk about it, and buried herself in her phone. Within a day or two, she seemed to move on, but now I feel like I'm not allowed to wear my watch when we go out together. To add more context, she never liked my ex. A big part of that is probably because my ex and I ended things on good terms and stayed in touch. Nothing dramatic happened, there were no betrayals or harsh words, it just didn't work out. But my current girlfriend made it clear she wasn't comfortable with me texting my ex, even as a friend. She even asked to read through all our old messages, which I let her do, and after that, I stopped communicating with my ex entirely. She's always seemed insecure about my past relationship. I've gone out of my way to reassure her, thinking time would strengthen her confidence in us. Now, I keep wondering, was it really such a big deal to wear that watch? Should I seriously consider selling it and putting the money toward a new watch? Even then, wouldn't whatever I buy just be indirectly funded by my ex's old gift? Or should I just stow it away in a box at the back of the closet and forget about it? I'm completely torn on what's right, because it's just a watch to me, but it clearly means much more than that to her. Update 1. There's one thing I need to clarify because everyone I talk to seems to assume otherwise. I never knowingly wore that watch after my girlfriend voiced a problem with it. The fact is, she never explicitly said it was an issue. Sure, she'd suggested I sell it a few times, always couched as a financial tip, never as an emotional request. I admit, I could tell she wasn't a fan, probably because of the price tag or maybe because she felt she could never match a gift like that, which couldn't matter less to me. But I never realized it ran deep enough to ruin our anniversary. I always thought her skepticism revolved around the watch's cost, not some lingering insecurity about my ex. Friday after work, I decided I had to clear the air. But first, I wanted to know what I was dealing with, so I talked to my dad's friend, a former jeweler, who said I could probably get around 75% of the original value by selling it privately, though it could take a while to find a buyer. For context, the watch is an Omega Railmaster. I found out that a new one these days would run $89K, which was a surprise. Given the condition of mine, I could probably get $56K for it if I chose to sell. I sat down with my girlfriend that evening and asked if we could talk. I told her I felt awful for upsetting her on our anniversary, and suggested maybe we could go out for a proper celebration Saturday night to make up for it. I asked if it would be alright if I kept the watch, but promised not to wear it on dates. She didn't hesitate, she said she'd rather it not even be in the apartment. I needed to understand why. That's when she admitted she felt like I was clinging to my ex. For her, keeping the watch meant keeping a part of my ex around, even if I never wore it, even if I tossed it into the bottom of my closet. She would still be there, she said. I tried to make her see that, to me, the watch had zero sentimental value. It wasn't some emotional totem, just a nice watch, with no secret meaning, no attachment. I made it clear, she was searching for significance where there was honestly none. Things unraveled from there. She started insisting I was in denial, that I needed to put my ex behind me by getting rid of the watch, and that keeping it meant I was still in love with my ex, that I wanted her back because she could buy me expensive things, which, for the record, was never the case. All of it couldn't have been further from the truth. If getting back together had been on my mind, I'd had my chance. In fact, Here's something that makes her theory even more absurd. 6 months after my ex and I broke up, long before I met my current girlfriend, my ex got laid off when her company downsized. She reached out, suggested we get back together. It hurt to say no, but I'd moved on and getting back together just felt like the wrong direction for both of us. Not long after that, she asked for the watch back. She was panicking about money, but the fact was she had a deep savings account and unemployment to fall back on. I refused because she didn't actually need a couple thousand from that watch. Eventually, she realized it wouldn't solve anything. Back in the present, after confronting me about loving my ex, my girlfriend asked to see my phone, a request I hadn't heard since we first started dating. That surprised me. At this point, I thought we trusted each other. I asked if she thought I loved her, if she thought I was cheating. She just said she didn't know. She started insisting again that if I truly loved her, I would have gotten rid of the watch on my own. The conversation, tense as it was, still remained relatively calm, up until then. Suddenly, things got volatile. In short, we broke up. I have no interest in being with someone who doesn't trust me. She insisted I was just looking for an excuse to get back together with my ex when I told her I wanted to end things. I even handed over my phone, told her to look while I packed up, just to prove there was nothing to hide. She accused me of deleting messages to cover my tracks. At that point, I realized nothing I could ever do would convince her I'd moved on from my ex. I went to stay with my sister, told my now ex I'd be back Sunday and she needed to be moved out unless she wanted the lease. Haven't heard from her since, so who knows if she's gone or not. It frustrates me that it ended like this, but so many people were right. She really let her insecurities take control and there's some growing up for her to do. One last thing, a surprising number of people have told me to lie about where the watch came from. That's just not who I am. I'm not going to advertise it, but I'd never lie if someone asked me directly. The thought never would have crossed my mind, but thanks for the advice, I won't be taking it. Update 2. Sunday I went back to the apartment. She was gone, closet empty, 2 keys on the counter, the spare set I'd given her with the little rubber giraffe keychain I'd joked made my keys easy to spot. No note. I stood in the kitchen a while because the place suddenly sounded different. I took off my coat and felt something hard in the inside pocket, the watch. I'd slipped it in there at dinner and apparently never moved it. I set it on the counter and just looked at it. Seeing it there after the week I'd had, it felt less like a thing I owned and more like a problem sitting on my Formica. By Monday, I decided the cleanest thing to do was take it out of play. If I was going to sell it, I wanted paperwork. My dad's friend had told me what it could go for, but private sales take time and I didn't want to end up writing a dissertation to every guy on Craigslist about authenticity. There's an Omega boutique a few blocks from my office. I went on my lunch break with the watch in a little microfiber bag like it was guilty of something and I was smuggling it to confession. The sales guy was friendly, pulled on thin gloves, admired it, said it was a nice piece. He asked if I wanted a service quote or just the extract. I told him service could help a sale, so he took it into the back to log the serial. A minute later a manager came out instead of the sales guy. He had that measured, professional smile that tells you he's about to say something you won't love but he won't let it get weird. He asked if we could step to the side. He told me, very matter-of-factly, that the serial number was flagged. The watch had been reported stolen during a burglary at a dealer in another state a few years back. He said it also happens with private thefts when owners or their insurers register the numbers. He didn't accuse me of anything. He asked where I'd gotten it. I told him it had been a birthday gift. I gave him the year. He nodded and asked if I'd be okay waiting while he called the non-emergency police line to figure out the right way to proceed, because their policy is to loop them in when a flagged serial crosses their counter. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and felt every stupid fight and conversation I'd had about that watch rearrange themselves into something I hadn't considered for even a second. A patrol officer showed up, took my ID, asked me to walk him through how it landed on my wrist. He took a few photos of the watch, the serial, and the boutique screen with the alert, wrote down my ex's first name and the city she lived in at the time. He said in situations like this, the watch ends up going back to the rightful owner or their insurer, and depending on jurisdiction, the shop may be obligated to hold it as evidence. He told me plainly I hadn't done anything wrong and that good faith recipient is a thing, but also that I wasn't going to get to keep it. The boutique asked to keep the watch. The officer said that was appropriate and easier for chain of custody than letting me walk out with it and promising to bring it in later. They gave me a copy of the incident number and the name of the detective unit that would follow up. I walked back to work with a piece of paper instead of a piece of metal, and weirdly, I felt lighter. It was like a trapdoor opened under a decision I'd been circling for days. That night I called my ex, the one who gave it to me. I don't save ringtones anymore, but when her name popped up on screen it felt like my phone belonged to an earlier version of me. She answered on the second ring. I told her plainly what I'd learned and that I needed to know where she'd bought it. There was a long pause, no theatrics, just a pause, and then she said, I bought it secondhand from a guy my coworker knew. He had the box and card and everything. It seemed legit. It was a deal, but not unbelievable. She kept apologizing. She sounded embarrassed more than anything, and I believed her. She offered to pay me what she paid, which apparently had been far less than what I thought. I told her I didn't want her money. I said I wasn't calling to make it her problem, I was calling because a detective was going to, and I didn't want that to be how she found out. We ended up talking for 20 minutes like people who used to know each other well and now don't. She told me she's seeing someone and they're moving in together in the fall. I told her my relationship just detonated over the watch she'd given me. She laughed once, quietly, not at me. That thing was doomed from the day I bought it, huh? It didn't feel like the universe nudging us. It felt like two people closing a file. The detective called Wednesday morning. He said the serial matched a loss from a robbery at an independent jeweler 2 towns over. Insurance had paid out, so the watch technically belonged to the insurer now, but the original store owner was still the point of contact. He asked if I'd be available if they needed a formal statement. I said yes. He told me I should expect no restitution. I said I understood. That afternoon, a number I didn't recognize called. It was the jeweler. He thanked me for not making it difficult, told me he'd been robbed during lockdown, 2 guys with masks and hammers, quick in and out, took 6 watches and some loose diamonds. He said the insurance company claws back a percentage against your next premium and that even though you get paid, you never really feel squared. Hearing one come back made his week. He asked me to come by if I had a minute. I drove over after work. His place is the kind of small shop you bring a watch to if you want someone to treat it like more than a price tag. Frames crooked on the wall, a vintage Pepsi clock, a jar of Hershey's Kisses on the counter. He showed me a printout of the police report and a blurry still from his security camera that might as well have been a movie poster for guys in hoodies. He didn't offer me cash. He did something nicer. He pulled out a tray of mid-range watches and told me to pick one at his cost as a thank you. It's not charity, he said. It's me wanting you to wear a watch without a ghost in it. I picked a Hamilton khaki field. Nothing fussy. Black dial, 38mm, on a canvas strap. It was 2 digits and a handshake compared to the Omega, and I loved it immediately. It looked like something my grandfather would have respected. The jeweler knocked off more than his cost and threw in 2 straps because he hates naked lugs. I paid with my own card and walked out aware that no one had subsidized the thing on my wrist but me. On the way home I got one text, from my now ex. Did you sell the watch? No punctuation. I sent a photo of the incident slip with the case number and, because I couldn't help being a little petty, the Hamilton on my wrist next to it. She didn't respond. I deleted the thread. It's funny, I spent a week arguing the watch wasn't a symbol, and then it turned out it was actually a stolen object. Not metaphorically, literally stolen. The whole fight morphed into a story with police reports and chain of custody forms. I didn't have to decide whether to keep it, sell it, or lie about it. The decision made itself in a way I couldn't have predicted or arranged. The apartment is quiet. I moved the key with the giraffe to my own key ring because it makes mine easier to spot, and because it's a giraffe and I'm not going to reinvent symbolism where there isn't any. The Hamilton sits on my nightstand next to the battered Timex and the Apple Watch, and for the first time in a while, none of them make me feel like I owe anyone an explanation. Update 3. Thursday morning the detective called and asked if I could swing by the precinct to give a formal statement. The lobby smelled like burnt coffee and dry paper. A TV in the corner was tuned to a morning show, all teeth and weather. In the interview room a laminated poster about property crimes intake was curling at the edges. He slid a recorder across the table, said it would be quick. He asked where the watch came from, when, whether I'd ever tried to sell it, whether anyone had ever asked me to. I answered like I was reading off a grocery list. He asked for my ex's full name and the coworker she mentioned. I gave him what I knew, first and last, approximate department, the kind of job title that sounds specific and isn't. He jotted it all down without looking dramatic about any of it. Before I left he showed me the Omega in an evidence bag, just long enough to verify the serial, as if to close the loop in my head as much as his file. Seeing it sealed like that made it look smaller. It was weirdly comforting. It wasn't my problem, it was a piece of inventory again. That afternoon, an email pinged from a no-reply.gov address with a scan of my statement for me to confirm. Attached was the case number and, hilariously, a PDF about how to request property back if it's released. I signed and sent. 10 minutes later my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was my ex, the one who bought the watch, speaking fast. The detective had called her. She gave them the coworker's contact. She sounded both relieved and sick about it. I honestly thought he just knew a guy, she said, which is the kind of sentence that looks different in the light. Friday after work I stopped by the jeweler to get the Hamilton sized properly. He had a loupe perched on his head like reading glasses and a paper calendar with the wrong month in the window. He waved me behind the counter without ceremony to show me a printout the insurance adjuster had left. They were offering him the option to buy his own recovered pieces back at salvage value, which is apparently a thing and also the worst kind of poetry. He tapped a line item with his thumbnail. Railmaster. He said, "You want first refusal? I'll eat my hat." I told him I was very attached to paying retail for something that didn't come with a case file. He laughed and pulled my Hamilton off my wrist like a tailor tugging at a sleeve. He took exactly one link out and handed it back. "You're a 38mm guy," he said, like he'd diagnosed me. Sunday morning there was a link in my inbox from the detective. A press release, 3 guys indicted for a string of smash and grab burglaries 2 summers ago. 2 pled out. 1 still pending. They'd recovered pieces dribbling back through pawn shops, dealers, private sales. There was a still frame of the front of the jeweler's shop, his door splintered like a toothpick. Names were black and white in the way only surnames in a PDF can be. I didn't recognize any of them until a little way down, where it mentioned a known associate who facilitated sales. The name was the coworker. Not his full name, but the right initials, the right age, the right city. It's a peculiar feeling, seeing a person you've only ever clocked in comment sections and group photos suddenly translated into a bullet point on a prosecutor's letterhead. I forwarded the link to my ex with no comment. She replied, "Jesus." That was it. That night someone leaned on my buzzer long enough to make the metal vibrate in the frame. I picked up the intercom and said hello, and a voice I didn't know asked if the Rolex guy lived there. I said wrong building, wrong street, wrong century, and hung up. I called the detective and left a voicemail because I've learned that's what you do when your buzzer turns into a plot device. He called back 10 minutes later and told me not to engage, that sometimes word fans out clumsily when people start getting arrested and they go looking for easy pressure points. He told me to call 911 if anyone tried the knob. No one did. I watched a cooking show for the next hour with the volume too loud and my shoes on. Monday I swapped the giraffe key to a different ring and dropped a spare set with my building manager. She's one of those people who remembers everyone's birthdays and could probably run the city if you handed her a pen. She looked at the keychain and smiled and said, "Good choice." I didn't explain. Midweek the jeweler called and asked if I could stop by. The adjuster was there again, doing more paperwork. He wanted a photo for his file of the nice man who brought one home. I am not a photo of me person, but I stood next to the Pepsi clock while the adjuster, khakis, clipboard, a tie that had seen better Mondays, took a quick snap. The Omega was in its bag on the counter between us like a sleeping animal. The jeweler put his hand on it, just for a second, the way you pat a dog you're not sure wants to be petted. "You know," he said, "when I bought that line I thought I was buying accuracy and steel. Turns out I also bought a story." I told him he could have it back. He told me he already did. On my way out, a guy my age with a toddler on his hip came in to pick up a quartz Seiko. The kid was wearing a dinosaur shirt with a hole in the collar and made a grab for the jar of Hershey's Kisses. The dad laughed and said, "Buddy, one thing at a time." It was a good line. It felt like a thesis. Last night my now ex, the one who moved out, texted that she'd found a sweater of mine at the bottom of a box and asked if I wanted it back. I said sure. She knocked at 8 and stood in the doorway holding it like a peace offering. We made small talk about work in the heat. She looked at my wrist and clocked the Hamilton. "Is that the watch?" I said no, and told her the short version of everything. The boutique, the flag, the detective, the jeweler, the press release, all in 3 sentences because that was all it took. She blinked once like she was adjusting to a room that had been rearranged. "Of course," she said, which contained a lot of things at once. She handed me the sweater. I asked if she wanted the giraffe keychain back. She shook her head and said, "It looks better on your ring anyway. We didn't try to make it into something it wasn't." She left. I locked the door. I wore the Hamilton to my nephew's karate belt test this morning. He stood in a line of kids in white uniforms and damp socks and broke a board that had almost certainly been pre-scored, but he looked like a gladiator and that's the point. My sister asked what time it was and I glanced at my wrist and told her. No backstory, no caveats, no asterisk. Just the time. It felt like getting a refund in the currency you actually needed. Update 4. Monday morning the number that lit up my phone didn't look like spam but had that bureaucratic shape to it. An assistant district attorney introduced herself, quick and efficient, like she was trying to save both of us from small talk. She said my name had landed on a witness list and asked if I could come in for grand jury testimony later in the week. An email followed with a PDF that looked like a parking pass married to a summons. I printed it at work because e-ink never feels real enough. The courthouse was cooled to one temperature regardless of season, the civic building climate. The security line moved in little size. I tossed my keys in a tray and the giraffe landed on its side, bright yellow in a bed of gray. A deputy slid my watch back with 2 fingers like it was a pen I dropped. Upstairs, every hallway smelled like furniture polish and time. They put me in a chair outside a door with a brass number. A woman in a sweater set handed me a paper cup of water that tried very hard to be cold. When I went in, the room wasn't dramatic. No spotlights. No gavel. Just wooden chairs occupied by people who looked like they had jobs they'd been pulled from. Nurses, teachers, a guy in a shirt with a landscaping logo. Someone swore me in with a hand motion so practiced it felt like a reflex. The AIDA asked me to state my name, spell it, tell them where the watch came from. When I learned what I learned, how it went from my wrist to an evidence bag. The microphone in front of me didn't amplify anything. It was there for the recorder, a mechanical ear. I answered in straight lines. Every once in a while a juror scribbled something, head tilted like they were trying to make the words balance. It took 15 minutes. On my way out the AIDA said, "Thanks," like we just held a door for each other. I pushed outside into daylight that felt loud. On the steps, a guy in a suit that tried its best was guided by 2 marshals into a side entrance. I knew him from a photo I hadn't thought about, barbecue in a park, group shot, this guy with a beer and a grin that wanted to be bigger. He looked smaller in person, those courthouse edges shaving everything down. He didn't see me, or he did and chose not to. Either way, It landed as both. That night a business card lay on my doormat when I got home, face up like it wanted to be seen. Defense investigator, embossed, a name that didn't ring any of my bells. A note on the back, quick chat people v. Initials. I called the Ada, left a message, and when she called back she said I didn't have to speak to anyone on the defense side unless I wanted to. If you do, let me know and I'll sit in, she added, practical and unruffled. I put the card on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a slice of pizza and didn't call the number. The jeweler phoned Wednesday afternoon like a friend asking if I could help move a couch, casual voice carrying something heavier. Insurance had processed faster than anyone expected. He'd bought back what he could at salvage and the Omega was coming home Friday in a padded envelope that made him sound both amused and insulted. If you're around, he said, I'm going to put it back in the case. Feels like it deserves someone who saw the middle of this story to see the end. I told him I'd stop by. He had the door propped with a rubber wedge that looked like it had been kicking that threshold since the 90s. An adjuster was perched on a stool doing math in the margins of a form. The jeweler held up the envelope like a magician about to produce a dove, except it was just cardboard and glue and a thunk that felt heavier than its size. He opened it with a box cutter carefully enough to make a surgeon proud. The watch slid into his palm, bagged, tagged. He took it out like you take a sleeping kid out of a car seat. He checked the serial and then didn't hide the way his shoulders settled. He polished the crystal with a square of cloth as if he were rubbing out the last of the day's nonsense and set it on a little black stand. He flipped the sign in front of it to not for sale. It looked right in the light. He asked if I wanted to set the time. I shook my head. You've got it, I said, and meant more than the time. A toddler made another bid for the Hershey's Kisses and his dad negotiated a trade for a lollipop from somewhere behind the register. The adjuster finally sighed the sigh of a man whose boxes were all ticked and left. The jeweler and I stood there with the quiet sound of HVAC and a clock that insisted it was 5 minutes fast. He said, "You okay?" The way dentists do, knowing the answer and asking anyway. I told him I was wearing the watch I was supposed to wear. He glanced at the Hamilton and nodded like a coach who'd placed a kid in the right position. On the way home my phone buzzed with a text from a number that wasn't saved but didn't feel strange. They came by my office, my ex wrote. That was it. I replied, cooperate, and then stared at the word a second because texts like that make you suddenly aware of your verbs. She sent back, I did. Thursday morning at work, a man in an excellent navy blazer that didn't quite fit his shoes introduced himself at reception as being from the defense team and asked if I had 5 minutes. He had the odd smile of someone trying to look like they're not in a hurry. I told him I wouldn't speak without the Ada present. He said that wasn't necessary, that he only wanted to clarify a couple of points. I told him he needed to email her. He handed me a card with 2 numbers and a third that looked personal. I thanked him for stopping by because I didn't know what else to do with the moment and walked him back to the elevator. He kept his eyes on the floor numbers as if they'd tell him how the day would go. Friday evening I went for a run through the park. I always tell myself I'm going to use more. The sky was that one color you only get for 5 minutes between pink and a decision. A guy jogging the other direction raised a hand as we passed, the kind of unearned solidarity you get from doing the same pointless thing at the same time. My Hamilton ticked against my wrist in a way that isn't ticking so much as a pressure, a little animal reminding you it's there. When I got back, I unlocked my door with the giraffe leading the way and heard my neighbor across the hall teaching someone how to play a chord on a guitar. The first attempt was messy. The second was less so, the third almost landed. Tonight I walked by the jeweler's on my way to pick up milk and a baguette because I'm apparently the sort of person who now buys a baguette on purpose. The Omega sat in the case looking like it had always been there, minus the path it had taken to get back. A kid's handprint smudged low on the glass near it. In the reflection I caught myself checking my wrist and then caught myself catching myself. I didn't make it anything. I bought what I came for, went home, sliced the bread unevenly, and ate it over the sink like a person. The Hamilton sat on the counter while I washed a plate and the sound it made when I set it down was exactly what a watch is supposed to sound like, a small, ordinary gravity. Update 5. The envelope on my doormat looked like every other piece of mail that thinks it's more important than it is, windowed, stiff, government return address that tries to sound like a person. Inside was a subpoena that had the formal weight of a wedding invitation without the cake. Trial, not grand jury this time. Different room, same building climate. I took a half day from work and packed my calm like a lunch. Courtrooms don't look like TV when you're in them. They look like classrooms with better wood. The judge had the unbothered face of someone who's seen versions of this all week. The defendant sat at the table in a suit that made an honest effort. The coworker wasn't there. I'd learned he'd pleaded out already, a sentence in an email that did a lot of work. They swore me in. My name sounded strange in the room, like wearing someone else's jacket. The Ada walked me through the same route we've taken before, how the watch got to me, the boutique, the flag, the officer, the detective, the jeweler. It felt like reading back directions you've memorized, landmarks instead of street names. The defense attorney had the kind of shirt so white you wonder about lifestyle choices. He leaned on the lectern and tried to make my refusal to give the watch back to my ex into a confession of something. He asked if I valued the watch. I said it was nice and expensive and did what watches do. He asked if I thought it might have been stolen when my ex asked for it. I said no, Because it hadn't crossed my mind. He asked if it crossed my mind when I learned it was worth more than I thought. I said price is not a crime. He made a face like I'd stolen his line. He asked if my ex and I stayed in touch after the breakup. The Ada objected. The judge agreed with a tired hand. He asked if I had the box and papers when I received it. I didn't. He asked if I'd ever had the watch serviced. I hadn't. He pivoted into a question about Craigslist as if saying the word out loud made the room seedier. The Ada objected again. Sustained. The defense attorney sighed, the kind of sigh that wants to be a laugh. On the way back to my seat, I passed the defendant at a distance close enough to clock that he was someone's brother. He didn't look at me. It felt like two trains passing the same point on different days. The jeweler was there, suit that fit him the way a shop apron does when you've worn both. He touched my elbow in the hallway like people do when they want to say hello without making it a thing. You did fine, he said. You told the truth. He handed me a tiny plastic bag I thought was a joke until I saw what was in it. 2 spring bars for the Hamilton. For when you inevitably butcher a strap, he said. He truly cannot abide naked lugs. I got a check in the mail 3 days later labeled witness fee that felt like a tip for telling time. It was $16.40 and a sense of humor. I bought coffee for my floor that morning and kept the change like a souvenir. The verdict came faster than I expected and slower than you'd want if you were the defendant. Guilty on the counts that had to do with hammers and glass. The Ada called me after to say thanks in the same tone you use when someone holds an elevator. It didn't feel celebratory so much as completed. A box checked in ink. That afternoon, a local news piece ran online with a thumbnail of the jeweler standing behind his counter and a headline that made smash and grab sound like a sandwich. There was no photo of me, small mercy, but there was a shot of the Omega in the case, the little not for sale sign in frame like a chaperone. A guy from my building stopped me in the lobby and asked if I'd seen the thing about the Rolex. I nodded and said yeah. We don't correct each other in lobbies. That's part of the lease. My ex, the one who bought the watch, texted me a screenshot of the article with a single word, sorry. It meant other things it didn't say. I told her she didn't know me that and that I hoped work had backed off. She wrote back that they had, and that her coworker who introduced her to the original seller had moved apartments unexpectedly, which is one way to describe bail. She sent a photo of a different watch on her wrist, a cheap digital with a plastic case that could survive a washing machine. I think this is my speed, she wrote. I told her a good beep on the hour can be happiness. The defense investigator's card on my fridge finally lost to gravity and slid under the toaster. I fished it out and tossed it in the trash without ceremony. It landed face down and that felt like punctuation. Friday at lunch I walked by the jeweler's because that's a thing I do now. The Omega sat in its spot, crystal clear enough to read your own expression back at you. The sign had moved from not for sale to a little handwritten card that just said house watch. He was ringing up a man buying a silver bracelet for an anniversary. When he saw me he lifted a finger and when the man left he tapped the top of the case, soft. Someone offered stupid money, he said, that small proud stubbornness in his voice. I told him we don't sell ghosts. Then he looked at me and grinned. We rent them. Hourly. He thinks he's funnier than he is. He's right. On Sunday I took my nephew to a museum because it was raining in sheets and we needed somewhere to be that wasn't a couch. He sprinted through the dinosaur hall like someone had started a race none of us could see. We stopped in front of a glass case with an engineering exhibit and he pressed his face to the plexiglass in a way that made every guard in the room wince. There was a big old pocket watch displayed with its guts visible, gears like a little city. He asked how time lives in there. I told him it doesn't, it just counts. He said that sounded like cheating and I said most useful things do. When we got home, there was a man sitting on the stoop 2 buildings down smoking a cigarette and talking into a phone on speaker, the tinny voice of someone arguing about money hissing back. He asked me if I knew where the pawn shop was. I told him there wasn't one on this block and kept walking. The detective's voice from a month ago lives in my head now, file it away and don't engage. My neighbor across the hall, the one with the guitar, propped her door with a sneaker and handed me a Tupperware of something that steamed like a science experiment. Lentil soup, she said. I made too much. She looked at the Hamilton because people notice things without meaning to. New? She said, and I told her yes, new to me. She said it suited. We ate standing in our doorways like two people who haven't figured out how to have company again. Tonight, the jeweler called after closing. His voice was the kind he uses when he's trying to sound casual and is not. Swing by tomorrow if you can, he said. I've got something you should see. I asked him what category of something. He said the kind that comes with paperwork. When a man in his profession says that, it can mean anything from a vintage catalog to an invitation to a tax audit. I said I'd stop by. He had a padded envelope on the counter when I did, return address of the insurance company, sender's name that sounded like it should belong to a dentist. He opened it with more care than it deserved and slid out a folded letter in a small box that was clearly not an Omega box. The letter was on heavy paper and said subrogation completed at the top, which is not a phrase designed to make anyone's day. He handed it to me. I scanned. A paragraph down, in the flat language of institutions trying to be human, the insurer wrote that, as a matter of courtesy in light of my cooperation, they were remitting a modest good faith purchaser stipend. The check was paperclipped to the back, an amount that won't change a life and wasn't pretend either. This ever happen? I asked. He shook his head. Nope, he said. But I like it. I stood there with a piece of paper that didn't exist in my universe a month ago and felt the last of the fight I'd been having with no one in particular let out of me like air. The jeweler slid a watch roll across the counter with a little grin, a leather tube the color of coffee. On the house, he said, destination for that stipend so you don't blow it on whatever it is you blow money on. I told him we both knew the answer was takeout and books. He offered me a Hershey's Kiss and I took two because I'm an adult. On the way home, I stopped at the kind of barbershop that still smells like talc and has a candy jar by the register. The guy who cuts my hair wears his comb behind his ear like a carpenter with a pencil. I sat in the chair and watched him in the mirror and saw the Hamilton for about the 100th time as if it were new. He asked what I did this weekend and I said I went to court and a jewelry store and a dinosaur museum, which is the kind of sentence that makes a life sound like a collage. He nodded like that was a normal route and squared up the back of my neck with a little click of the trimmer that felt like punctuation. When I got home my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know that I let ring out because that's a decision I've earned. The giraffe key caught on the lip of the lock like it always does and then swung free. I set the stipend check on the counter under the magnet shaped like a pizza slice and put the Hamilton in the roll because the jeweler would sleep better if he knew I'd used it. Later I burned garlic by answering a text too slowly and had to open a window. I checked the time without thinking. The watch didn't make it a moment. It just measured one. That was enough.